Following Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the US House of Representatives, visiting the island, China has conducted its largest ever display of military force in the skies and seas surrounding Taiwan, including the firing of ballistic missiles. China views Taiwan as a secessionist province that will eventually return to Beijing's rule. With its own constitution and democratically elected officials, the self-governing island, nonetheless, views itself as distinct from the mainland. The President of China, Xi Jinping, has stated that reunification with Taiwan must be fulfilled and hasn't ruled out the possibility of using force to accomplish this. Want the full story on the escalating hostilities between China and Taiwan? Then make sure to watch this video to the end. Also, do not forget to subscribe to our channel to watch more of these intriguing videos. An island called Taiwan is located about 100 miles off the coast of southeast China. It is located in the so-called First Island Chain, which is made up of several US-friendly countries and is essential to US foreign policy. Some Western experts say that if China were to take over Taiwan, it could be freer to project influence in the Western Pacific region and could even threaten US military sites as far away as Guam and Hawaii. China, though, argues that its goals are only peaceful. Let's take a look at the relationship between Taiwan and China's past before delving further into the specifics of the current issue between the two. Austronesian tribal people from modern-day southern China are regarded to have been the first known settlers in Taiwan. The island appears in Chinese annals for the first time in AD 239, when an emperor sent an expeditionary army to explore the area, a fact Beijing uses to support its territorial claim. Taiwan was controlled by China's Qing dynasty from 1683 to 1895, following a brief period as a Dutch colony. Significant numbers of migrants began to arrive from China beginning in the 17th century, frequently fleeing upheaval or hardship. The majority were either Hokklo Chinese from Fujian province or Hakka Chinese from Guangdong. Their descendants have grown to be the island's largest population group. Japan won the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895, forcing the Qing government to relinquish Taiwan to Japan. Japan surrendered and relinquished control of the area it had conquered from China after World War II. The Republic of China, one of the war's winners, took control of Taiwan with the approval of its allies, the United States and the United Kingdom. However, a civil war broke out in China in the following years, and the troops of then-leader Chiang Kai-shek were defeated by Mao Zedong's Communist Army. In 1949, the remnants of Chiang's Kuomintang administration and their allies, around 1.5 million people, escaped to Taiwan. This minority, known as mainland Chinese, dominated Taiwanese politics for many years, while accounting for only 14% of the population. Chiang formed an exile government in Taiwan, which he headed for the next 25 years. After taking power, Chiang's son, Chiang Ching-kuo, allowed for more liberalization. He encountered opposition from locals who were tired of autocratic control, as well as pressure from a growing democracy movement. President Lee Teng-hui, renowned as Taiwan's father of democracy, oversaw constitutional revisions that paved the way for the island's first non-KMT president, Chen Shui-bian, to be elected in 2000. So the question now is, who recognizes Taiwan? There is some debate and misunderstanding concerning what Taiwan is. It has its own constitution, democratically elected authorities, and an armed force of approximately 300,000 active personnel. Chiang's ROC government in exile first claimed to represent the entire country of China, which it sought to reoccupy. It held China's seat on the United Government's Security Council and was recognized as the sole Chinese government by several Western nations. However, during the 1970s, some countries argued that the Taipei government could no longer be regarded as a true representative of the hundreds of millions of people living on the Chinese mainland. The UN then transferred diplomatic recognition to Beijing in 1971, forcing the ROC governments to leave. China began opening up its economy in 1978 as well. Recognizing trade prospects and the desire to strengthen relations, the United States formally established diplomatic ties with Beijing in 1979. Since then, just roughly 15 nations still recognize the ROC government. Taiwan's legal situation is still up in the air, despite the fact that it still possesses all the traits of an independent state and a separate political system from China. How are ties between Taiwan and China? As Taiwan loosened regulations on travel to and investment in China, relations began to improve in the 1980s. It declared war on the People's Republic of China to be concluded in 1991. China suggested the so-called one country, two systems alternative, which it said would grant Taiwan great autonomy if it consented to come under Beijing's authority. This system served as the foundation for Hong Kong's return to China in 1997, and was the way it was administered up until recently, when Beijing moved to exert more authority over the territory. Unofficial delegates from China and Taiwan continued to hold brief discussions despite Taiwan rejecting the offer and Beijing maintaining that the ROC government of Taiwan is unconstitutional. Then, much to Beijing's concern, Taiwan chose Chen Shui-bian as president in 2000. The Democratic Progressive Party, Mr. Chen's party, had publicly endorsed independence. China issued a so-called anti-secession law in 2005, a year after Mr. Chen was re-elected, which stated China's right to employ non-peaceful means against Taiwan if it attempted to secede from China. In 2008, the KMT's Ma Ying-jeou succeeded Chen and worked to normalize things through trade deals. Tsai Ing-wen, the current leader of the pro-independence DPP, was chosen to serve as Taiwan's president 8 years later, in 2016. The rhetoric became much sharper in 2018 as Beijing increased its pressure on foreign businesses, threatening to prevent them from conducting business in China if they failed to declare Taiwan as a part of China on their websites. Ms. Tsai won a second term in 2020 with a record-breaking 8.2 million votes, which was generally viewed as a snub to Beijing. Numerous people in Taiwan were keeping a close eye on the tumult that had been raging in Hong Kong for months over the growing influence of the mainland. Later that year, China enacted a national security law in Hong Kong, which is seen as another manifestation of Beijing's assertiveness. Moving on, let's discuss how much of a problem Taiwan's independence is. Despite the glacial pace of political change, relations between Beijing and Taipei, as well as their respective economies, have improved. Taiwanese official estimates show that between 1991 and the end of May 2021, Taiwan invested a total of $193.5 billion in China. Some Taiwanese are concerned that China is becoming the main driver of their country's economy. Others think that because of the cost to China's own economy, tighter business links make Chinese military involvement less likely. In 2014, the Sunflower Movement, a protest by students and activists against what they saw as China's expanding control over Taiwan, was prompted by a contentious trade agreement. Officially, the KMT supports eventual unification with China, whereas the DPP continues to support Taiwan's official independence. However, the majority of Taiwanese tend to fall somewhere in the middle. Only 5.2% of Taiwanese respondents to a study conducted in June 2022 favored independence for Taiwan as soon as possible, while 1.3% preferred early reunification with mainland China. The majority of those people who oppose any movement towards independence or unity want to keep things as they were indefinitely. The rest favored some form of status quo maintenance. Can Taiwan stand its ground? China might make an effort to achieve reunification through non-military means, such as fostering closer economic connections.
以和平方式实现祖国统一，最符合包括台湾同胞在内的中华民族整体利益。
The Chinese military, however, would be far superior to Taiwan's in any military conflict. China spends more on military than any other nation outside the US and has access to a wide range of weapons systems, including aircraft, missiles, and cyber attacks, in addition to its naval might. Even while China concentrates much of its military force elsewhere, there is a vast disparity between the two sides overall, for instance, in terms of active duty men. Some Western experts believe that in an open confrontation, Taiwan may at best try to delay a Chinese attack, try to block a shore landing by Chinese amphibious forces, and launch guerrilla attacks while awaiting foreign assistance. The US, which sells Taiwan armaments, might offer that assistance. Because of Washington's strategic ambiguity doctrine up to this point, it has been intentionally unclear whether or how the US would defend Taiwan in case of an assault. In terms of diplomacy, the US still adheres to the One China policy.
I don't know why we have to be bound by a one-China policy.
Which recognizes Beijing as the only legitimate home of the Chinese government and favors formal relations with China over Taiwan. However, US President Joe Biden seemed to tighten Washington's stance in May. When asked if the US would militarily defend Taiwan, Mr. Biden responded yes. Washington, according to the White House, had not altered its stance. Liking the video so far? Then go like, share, and subscribe now. The question now is the situation deteriorating? Following Ms. Pelosi's visit, which Beijing deemed very dangerous, relations between Taiwan and China appear to have rapidly worsened. China's military drills concentrated on 6 dangerous areas surrounding Taiwan, 3 of which cross the island's exclusive economic zone. Taiwan claims the action, which required ships and aircraft to find alternative routes, infringed on its sovereignty and amounted to a blockade. The exercises were supposed to stop on August 7th, but on August 8th, China resumed extensive military exercises near Taiwan. China and Taiwan are already experiencing rising tensions. By sending military aircraft into Taiwan's self-declared air defense zone in 2021, China appears to increase pressure. This zone is where foreign aircraft are identified, tracked, and controlled for national security purposes. When 56 incursions were reported in a single day in October 2021, when Taiwan's defense minister claimed that relations were at their lowest point in 40 years, the number of planes reported that year reached a peak. In 2020, Taiwan released information on aviation invasions. Let's now discuss Taiwan's importance to the rest of the world. The economy of Taiwan is quite significant. Taiwanese computer chips power a large portion of the world's common electronic devices, including phones, computers, watches, and games consoles. According to one metric, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, also known as TSMC, controls more than half of the global market. TSMC is a so-called foundry, a business that produces semiconductors with the help of both commercial and governmental clients. It is a sizable sector, expected to generate up to $100 billion in 2021. Beijing might gain some control over one of the most significant sectors in the world if China invades Taiwan. Are Taiwanese citizens worried? Research indicates that many Taiwanese citizens are not very disturbed by the recent tensions between China and Taiwan. The Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation polled citizens in October 2021 to find out if they believed that China and Taiwan might one day go to war. The majority, 64.3% of respondents, said no. Why Xi Jinping's threats towards Taiwan are economically inconvenient. Chinese missile launches and aggressive naval and air exercises. In reaction to US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's recent trip to Taipei, have altered the military balance in the area around Taiwan. Beijing appears to be taking economic measures to largely unimpeded cross-strait trade, including banning imports of a number of Taiwanese food products and stopping Chinese sand exports. The unsettling reality that Chinese President Xi Jinping must face as he intensifies the conflict in the Taiwan Strait is highlighted by this imbalance. If the conflict worsens, the economies of both nations stand to suffer. While China's economy is teetering on a knife's edge, its much-touted economic miracle is being undercut by the real estate crisis and Xi's zero-COVID policies. Taiwan, powered by its world-leading semiconductor industry, is witnessing strong development. Codependence is the foundation upon which China's and Taiwan's economies are based, and it would be detrimental to both nations to sever the links that have grown over the previous generation, to include important industries like electronics. Not to mention the global consumers, financiers, investors, manufacturers and suppliers who depend on the same supply networks. Beijing could have more specifically targeted Taiwan's economic relations with Taipei if it had been serious about punishing Taiwan economically for hosting Pelosi. For instance, it might have affected Taiwan's $189 billion worth of exports to China and Hong Kong last year, which included more than 50% of electrical goods going to the mainland. Additionally, the Taiwan Strait, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, may have been severely hampered. In fact, Goldman Sachs believes that long-term trade restrictions would be extremely disruptive to the supply chains for technology and very harmful to Taiwan's economy. However, by taking such measures, Beijing would also be shooting itself in the foot. Without Taiwan-made electronic components, China's export machinery would be severely hindered, let alone all the other imports offloaded at its ports. This delicate balance was highlighted by a Taiwanese finance ministry official that the electronics sector of Taiwan and China are extremely dependent on one another. Therefore, we anticipate that there is very little was meant to punish DPP supporters in Taiwan. Another Chinese media site asserted that Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturers, who require highly processed quartz sand to create chips, would suffer as a result of the export ban on sand. However, Taiwan's building sector often imports Chinese sand, and quartz sand can be found in other parts of the world. In addition, China's imports of Taiwanese sand decreased from about 80% in 2012 to under 10% in 2013. Last but not least, the government-run Economic Daily News in China warned its domestic audience that Taiwan's economy is already under pressure from reduced export sales, rising prices, and a recession, and that its lower and middle classes are threatened by a spiraling cycle of poverty. However, that description was more appropriate for China, whose growth rate in the second quarter of 2022 sank to 0.4%, well below Taiwan's growth of 3.08%. Numerous zero-COVID shutdowns have hurt many Chinese people and enterprises, among other things, increasing youth unemployment to around 20%. The status of the real estate industry in China, where home sales have fallen this year due to at least 28 of the top 100 property developers in the nation defaulting on bonds and loans, is also concerning. None of this diminishes Taiwan's underlying economic issues. Income inequality is a significant problem, particularly for labor-intensive businesses and a younger generation that struggles to find excellent jobs or afford housing. And the chip boom won't help the ailing sectors, which extend well beyond TSMC. Even so, stocks listed on Chinese markets have declined for 6 weeks, and recent developments in the Taiwan Strait have only increased investors' concerns about the country's economic prospects. Even though Taipei's stock market had a minor decline following Pelosi's visit, the situation was far better than it was during the previous standoff with China in 1995 to 1996, when China launched its first missile into waters close to Taiwan and the market dropped by 20%. What does this all mean? In conclusion, Taiwan has come to see Beijing's military drills and threats as routine, especially when it comes to conducting business with a tyrant. The way forward. China, in particular, is keeping an eye on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, so before taking any action against Taiwan, Beijing will consider the effects of the current conflict. The Chinese economy, however, is much larger than the Russian economy, and therefore it will also be taken into account. Any escalation in the Taiwan Strait will have an impact on trade and security throughout the whole Indo-Pacific. As evidence that Chinese aggression has already begun to damage nations like Japan and Australia have called on China to stop its military drills and missile tests near Taiwan. This ends the video. Comment below on how you found it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Bye!